Sarah, as a relationship development coach, what should we know about attachment theory and how can we identify our own attachment style?
Beautiful question. I'm so glad you asked this because it comes up so much with the clients that I'm working with. This attachment theory is something that has occurred at early level learning in our childhood, predominantly by our caregivers. And it kind of plays out in our adult lives, in our interpersonal relationships. But it was really, if I could share with you exactly who created this, it's a woman called Mary Ainsworth. A little bit of nerdy tech in the background here, so just to explain. So Mary Ainsworth did a study in the 70s, in the late 60s and the 70s, called the Strange Situation Study, where she asked mothers, caregivers, to bring their toddlers into a controlled environment, a study room, which was filled with toys for the child to play with. And the focus of the study was when they asked the mother to leave the room, or the caregiver to leave the room for a couple of minutes, and they observed how the child reacted to the caregiver leaving the room. Now, from a child's perspective, you've got to understand that the caregiver is their only survival mechanism. Without that caregiver, the child's security support system was just gone. So it was really interesting to try and determine how the child was going to react in the absence of the caregiver. So the mother caregiver leaves the room for a couple of minutes. They watch the study. Then the mother comes back, and they focus on how the child then reacts with the mother. Are they rejecting the mother? Are they angry? Are they avoidantly not engaging with the mother, or are they becoming very anxious and they go towards the mother, needing that attention, needing that reassurance of love? And so from this particular study, they determined three different attachment styles. So you've got the anxious, the avoidant, and the secure. Much later on, they found a fourth, but for the sake of this, for this conversation, we'll just focus on the three. And so what happens in adult life, the anxious person will chase after love, will chase after that nurturing. They fear being rejected. They need that constant reassurance. And it stems really from that early stages with the caregiver. And there might be all sorts of reasons why that caregiver or parent or mother wasn't consistent with the love that they provided. Maybe the parent had two jobs. Maybe they were a single parent. There could have been all sorts of addictions involved. There could be all sorts of numerous reasons. But essentially, the child has learned sometimes my caregiver's there for me, sometimes they're not. And when they're not, I need to earn their love. I need to prove that I'm worthy of their love in order to get it, because it will be removed from me, or I'll be rejected, or in some way there's these fears are coming up, because for the child, that's their support survival line, right, to their caregiver. So for the avoidant person, the avoidant child was pretending, I say pretending, but making out that they didn't actually need the partner, the caregiver, when they came back into the room. So the avoidant was really, they noticed that inside they were having the same emotional responses as the anxious person, but they were really, really masking it. They really weren't showing it at all. It was almost like, I don't need you. I'm not going to show any weakness here. I'm not going to make out that I need anything. So they really learned to cope without associating with their own emotions. They really learned to disassociate. So what became really evident is that emotionally avoidant people are really experienced a significant amount of neglect as children. So it's really to bring that kind of compassion when someone is having difficulty in expressing their emotions, purely because they would have learned at a younger age not to deal with their emotions. So that's really, in a nutshell, the kind of study that and what I'm so passionate about and really want to help my clients with, because it's that in the dating pool with people that are actually looking for partners, more often than not, you'll find the anxious and the avoidant person are triggering each other and tend to stay in the dating pool more than a secure person. Secure people tend to make up 50% of the population, and yet they're able to maintain long term relationships because they're very secure in and of themselves. They understand boundaries, they can articulate their needs, they're quite comfortable with space. Um, yeah, they're kind of like the golden goose of the dating world.
Yep. Sarah, that is fascinating, and I'm glad that you brought that story. That you gave a backstory how the whole study began, right? How they were. I guess it goes from since like a newborn all the way to age of 4 or 5 that you sort of develop
Well,
that sort
so
of attachment.
So they say, I don't know if you've heard this saying, give me a child at the age of the seven, and I'll give you the man, the woman. And so, yeah, these are really early stages of development at really significant times in a child's life, because they're sort of defining what their boundaries are, what's safe, how far away from my caregiver can I go and still survive. Because up until that point, a baby can't eat by itself. It can't do anything, right? It can't move. It can't do anything. It's relying wholly on the caregiver to be able to support it in every single need. And so as the child starts to develop and it starts to express its boundaries and start to explore, it's still relying on that caregiver. With the secure child understands, I can go over here and I trust that my caregiver is going to be there and be consistent for me and support me in areas and still allow me to go off and explore. So that's the real big difference between the three distinctions.
I've always felt that we humans are so useless when we are newborn. So you see all the species of animals, and right out of the womb, they're already walking or doing some stuff. Humans, it take us a few years to just be quote
Yeah,
unquote independent. So it's like fascinating. But one of the things that you mentioned about the way that these babies, toddlers, kids were treated, and some of the research I've done in the past seems like my understanding is like both the anxious and the avoidant has like a similar origin stories. I mean, there are a few things that overlap, like the emotional distance from caregivers, inconsistency in communication, or even parent, or just even a parent that wasn't available.
yeah,
Now, it seems that it all comes down to how our brains or even our nervous system process these experiences.
sure.
It seems to me, again, and this is just my perception, I don't know exactly if this is entirely true, that most women who are not secure are anxious and most men who are not secure are avoidant. Why do you think that this is the case?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I have found very similar statistics. All right, and I think it stems from an old kind of thinking. This adage you might have heard: "Real men don't cry." And so, if you're a real man, you're not allowed to be in touch with your emotions. You don't show your emotions. And so, what that teaches is young boys is that somehow their emotions are bad. That if they exhibit these kind of emotions, they're tapping into femininity, and they don't want to do that because they might get picked on by the other boys at school, or this ingrained indoctrination that is forcing young boys to kind of detach from their emotions is what I believe creates that distinction between men and women. And women are really encouraged. You can be emotional, you can cry. That knight in shining armor is going to come in and rescue you and be that support structure and that full, um, you know, the damsel in distress kind of thinking, which I think and hopefully is changing with new generations coming through. I'm really seeing a difference in that. Men are much more tapping into that feminine side and are much more stepping into being vulnerable and not fearful of what that means, because we all have emotions. No one gender should be devoid of those emotions. But I think from those 70s, from the 70s, those years that are coming through, I think that's why. But again, that's just my own personal opinion and my own insights with the people that I'm working with.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned about the whole cultural thing that have been since almost the beginning of time. For some reason, how I don't even know how we came to this conclusion that men shouldn't show the emotions. I'm sorry, I should say that the only emotion we're allowed to show is anger. It's like the
Right,
only emotion we are free to. Which, funny enough, if a woman shows anger, then that's bad, but if a woman
right.
shows sadness or shame or depression or just anxiety or anything like that, it's fine, but we are not fine. So I know that society puts some of these are being more feminine, more masculine. And I think that's what keeps people from, or even men from even tapping into those behaviors or to those practices. Because, like, okay, masculinity is something that I heard on a podcast that a man has to prove himself all the time that he's masculine and all of that. It's like always constantly proving, which it leads to a point that masculinity is a very hard thing to get and easy to lose. So just by showing the emotion, it's just like, okay, I'm, it took me a, a long time to get to where I am and I can lose it just like that. I'm not willing to risk it. It's hard to change that among I mean in people or at least in society. I like that you mentioned about this particular thing because and you and I talked off camera that how I thought in the past I used to be an avoidant. Then I read the book Attach. Everyone should read that book. It's something
It's
that will
amazing,
give you
Lord. Yeah.
yeah, they will give you a lot of insights. But then I found out that I was actually an anxious person masked as a avoidant because the neediness. It was like that's not masculine. If somebody, if even let's
Right.
do on a very simple example that everyone could relate to. Even on early stages of dating, if a guy double texts a girl, that turns the girl off immediately. If a girl double texts a guy, the guy can it's not a big deal. So that point, I think maybe I don't know about since you treat a lot of clients, I wonder how many men are actually anxious, but they need to act as an avoidant just because they're afraid of even being seen vulnerable or too needy or too feminine or whatnot.
Right. Right. No, I think it's a great point you raise, because what I'm hearing there is that when you talked about feeling the need to keep proving your masculinity, as if it's not a given, right? You're a man, it's a given, right? But the need to keep proving, my question would be, how would you know when you'd proven enough? What is the benchmark that you're setting for yourself, that this standard that you're trying to get to, where somehow this imaginary standard in your mind means that I'm now a man? So just to catch, you keep on having to prove. It's like you're chasing something. How would you know when you got there? And I think this is really an undercurrent for what you're speaking to, that this fear of being seen as being too feminine, or stepping into vulnerability, or getting in touch with your emotions. That it's like as you're talking, I'm imagining it's like this low level engine that's just running in the background, and suddenly it'll start to rev up and take over, but it's constantly there. It's just like on this little purring in the background. And so that's this fear that's running, that somehow you're going to be perceived as not masculine enough. So, my question for you, Daniel, really would be, how would you know when you're masculine enough, when you've reached that point?
Actually, I've asked myself that question quite a
Okay.
few times because to me it's like, okay, what does it mean to be a man? Because
Right.
and that is almost like we don't know. But I follow this guy. He has a podcast, Chris Williamson. On his newsletter, he pointed out something that he realized, how we need enough quote unquote man points before showing vulnerability. So if you're highly successful, or if you are a six-time champion bodybuilder, like somebody like a Chris Bumstead or something, right? Then, only then, you're allowed to be vulnerable. You're allowed to cry, because nobody will label you as weak, as
Right.
feminine, as less of a man, because you have achieved something that very, very, very few people on this earth have achieved. So I get it. I get it, how we feel like, if I'm looking up, if I look up to someone that I admire, and that person breaks down, it's like, okay, I can relate to him because he's human. Then I feel inspired by him. But if somebody next to me does that, it just, to me, it exacerbates my insecurities, because I feel as weak as he is, and then I'm not okay with that, because
Right.
we haven't achieved anything. So I think that it's almost like the definition of success. Everyone has a different one. So
Right.
how men we should be, I guess,
Right.
is very individual.
Yeah, and I love that sharing, Daniel, because you what we talked. We had a little chat before we came online, and we were talking about how we discount our achievements, we discount our the things that we've achieved, the challenges that we've overcome. We tend to avoid that or ignore that, not avoid it, but we don't tend to kind of put that on our radar. We tend to look at the failures and the things we haven't achieved. And just there, where you were sharing, you're talking about there's a small number of people that have achieved all of these things, and there may be somebody next to me that just points out something that I've not achieved, and I'm falling back down again because that's all I'm focusing on. And it's really interesting because I think it's a cultural thing. At least here in Australia, we call it the tall poppy syndrome, where you're not allowed to sort of get ahead or be better than anybody else because you'll be big-headed, or you can't be seen to be better in some way. And so that in itself is discounting our own achievements, our own challenges, so that we've got this concept that there is only a small number of people that are able to get that six pack, that are able to have that huge success. But I don't believe that's true. I think that we are capable, and it just is a mindset shift. We've all overcome challenges in our lives. Hand on heart, we've all experienced things of difficulty that we've overcome, and we discount that resilience that we have within. We compare ourselves to others all the time, and we put ourselves down, and it's really sad to think that we don't acknowledge what we've achieved.
Yes, and as I mentioned to you before we start recording, it's like I can definitely relate to that, because I would downplay my achievements, even achievements like running a marathon, that people keep telling me 1% of the population have run, and not every, and 99% has not. To me, it never felt like achievement, but because I conditioned my body or my brain to discount those, because once I achieve something, then it's not a big deal. But in the process of achieving is hard. Once I get it, I don't know if it's the expectations. I don't know if I saw what happened to me a few times, where on different type of goal settings, it's like once achieved the goal, it's like, okay, this is the most anticlimactic thing. It's almost like I was expecting something bigger. I suffered for months to get a hit of dopamine that lasted 3 hours, maybe a day. That's kind
Right,
of sad. That's kind
right,
of sad.
right. I was talking with my client yesterday about this kind of topic, and if I could share this with your audience, I don't know
Sure,
whether this
for
would have been of any help.
absolutely.
So running this kind of discounting and not really being able to recognize all the things that he'd achieved. And I think, if I could invite your listeners to just think of something that they found challenging, whether it was big or small, something that you found really challenging, there was a bit of adversity around it. It might have been overcoming heartbreak, or, traveling around in a motorhome for a couple of years, whatever you found challenging, right? Small or big. And just recognize that you overcame that. And just imagine in your mind's eye that all of the people that you care about, all of your friends and family, everyone that you love, just imagine them around you in your mind's eye and imagine them giving you a standing ovation for achieving that thing, achieve and overcoming it, and just seeing and feeling the love and feeling all the smiles as they're looking at you and giving you high fives and telling you how amazing you are for overcoming that thing, how it would shift the way you see yourself.
Yeah, and that is, I think, what keeps us, a lot of us, miserable and suffering, just focusing on the bad things rather than on the good things. I recently interviewed this very successful woman that she said, think about this: you have survived, or you have overcome 100% of of your bad days this
Yes,
far, right?
100%.
You are undefeated. You're
Yes,
undefeated. So
undisputed. I love that.
yeah, so that mind shift is fascinating. But one thing that when you mentioned about, and before we go back to attachment theory, but about us focusing on our failures and not on our successes or our wins. I don't know if you have seen how, when you have buckets of um, crabs that are alive, you don't have to put a lid on it, because the moment that one tries to get out, other ones pull them back in. And thought to myself, like, we ourselves are the ones who try to get out and pull ourselves back in, because even if we have these things, even if we have our success, that we can use it to get out of it, we tear ourselves down and we put it back ourselves in that bucket, because we don't give ourselves enough credit, and because we focus a lot on our failures.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think I don't know. Um, I'm not even going to try and misquote it. I probably will misquote it. There was something to do with Harvard students or Harvard graduates that had come from, let's say, wealthier backgrounds. They had a preconceived idea that they were going to win, that they were going to pass, they were going to go to Harvard, they were going to go and get all of these grades. Whereas the people who hadn't come from wealthier backgrounds but got into Harvard for whatever reason were always thinking they're going to fail, were always thinking that they were going to have to try harder. And it's basically a mindset shift. It's what we've come to determine what we're worthy of. And so that idea of the crabs being pulled down, they've got a benchmark of where they see themselves in the world. And it's no different to someone going from a wealthy background to Harvard to someone who's not wealthy going to Harvard. You've got the same resources, the same ability. It's our mindset and what we think about ourselves and how much we feel we are worthy of that. Whether it's in relationships, whether it's thinking I'm a man or a woman, or with work, in any kind of space in that sense. It's just what we believe we are worthy of. And we are all worthy. We are, we are made of the stars. If you're religiously minded, we are children of God, and there could be nothing more important than that. So we are all incredibly worthy.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about mindset. In fact, because of that, because our brain will find evidence of what we believe in. So automatically, if we already feel that we're not worthy, we're gonna find people that are gonna see us that way. Or if we
Yeah.
feel that we're not gonna get that job, or we don't deserve that much money, our brains will do the job of finding the evidence to
Yes.
support that that thesis. So, which brings me to a point, and when you and I spoke about a month ago about why I didn't want to dive in too much into attachment theory at the beginning, was because I feel that nowadays people tend to hold their identity or attach their identity to something, like I have autism, or I have ADHD, or I have anxiety, or I'm anxious so I cannot date, or I'm avoidant. So people tend to attach their identity a lot to something, instead of thinking as a growth mindset, or we can change, we can evolve, and how our brains can, the neuroplasticity in our brains allow us to change. So since we know, or at least it is known, that attachment theory is a spectrum, right? We can go from secure to avoidant to anxious and all of that, depending of the relationships we experience. how can those who have either anxious or avoidant become secure?
Beautiful questions. Big question. I think if I just briefly talk about avoidant first and then anxious. So
Hmm.
the trait with an avoidant person is that they just avoid things. They just don't take any kind of real responsibility for their own emotions. And this is a gross generalization, but they tend to because they're emotionally unavailable, they don't take personal responsibility or accountability. Nothing is their fault. Nothing is, it's all to do with out there. It's all another person. So they're not actually taking any responsibility. So they can be very self-aware, but not when it comes to them. So they don't tend to come into coaching or seek any kind of help because it's not really their problem, right? And so I don't, as a generalization, I don't tend to attract a lot of avoidant people to work within my coaching space. So I hope that kind of generally answers that question. But for if they are able to see that they're avoidant, if they're able to see that, and that's the big leap here, then it's about being able to be comfortable with the emotions. And that's a massive, massive step for someone who's avoidant, to be able to tap into and at least start naming what emotions are. I've spent a lot of time with guys just talking them through what happy, sad, glad, mad, and where they're feeling that in the body, and really try to get the nervous system activated again. So it really goes back to basics on just tapping into what emotions are. So that will be the first step. But for the anxious, sorry, for the anxious person, is a few things. Again, to manage the emotions, to not feel like it was on such an emotional train wreck or on a roller coaster ride, because the emotions have, you're hooked by the emotions when you're running an anxious attachment style. So it's about managing those emotions. And one of the first things that I do when I'm working with an anxious person is to start getting them to feel comfortable with space. Now, space, I mean, on various different levels, not just physical space, but emotional and mental space. So physically speaking, if they're in a relationship with someone and they're constantly needing that reassurance, maybe they're living and working together 24/7 and they feel any kind of resistance if the partner wants to go away physically. And so what that does is actually limits their capacity to be stimulated outside of the relationship, and so it becomes quite stagnant because they're unable to be comfortable with that physical space. So I often encourage, go get some friends outside of the relationship, get some other interests, get some hobbies, just be stimulated in other ways, because then you're going to be able to bring that into the relationship, and that will harness and grow and develop the relationship. So that's physical space. Then the emotional space is obviously not interpreting everything as being my fault, and I'm going to be rejected, and interpreting every little nuance in facial movements. If someone rolls their eyes, that's something to do with me. What have I done wrong? And constantly going into that worst case scenario, running that kind of anxious attachment, anxiety, projecting the worst case scenario into the future and making that real now in the moment. So the emotional regulation would be the second thing to deal with. And then the mental space. If I'm dating someone for the first time and I'm sending them some text messages and they don't text me back, and I'm running the anxious attachment, I'm going to start wondering, what did I say? Did I say something wrong? Why haven't they texted me back? Let me just send another text. I'll send another text message just to see if they're okay. And I still don't hear back from that. And then I want to send another text message. And so it's like the flurry of text messages, because mentally, more time that goes past, the more I'm starting to think about, I should have done this, or how do I mitigate this relationship from leaving me, or how do I stop them from rejecting me? And so it's getting space mentally, physically, and emotionally for the anxious person. That's where I start.
That's quite interesting with the avoidant as well, because I interviewed recently somebody about narcissism, and it seems very, very similar in a way that they don't. Those who have extreme narcissism is almost incurable, untreatable, just because they lack the awareness, and for them nothing is wrong with them. So it seems like with the avoidant, it's a very similar thing. It's like I don't. It's because it's not even that much of a in extreme cases like I'm losing my independence or my freedom, and then you can easily convince them that they're avoidant. But then there are cases perhaps that I don't know, you know what, she wasn't truly the right girl or the right guy, there was something. So there would be very, very mild signs that it would be hard for them to pick up, even for other people, even their friends, to see that person as an avoidant. So for them, it's like, well, it's not my problem. Just that girl or that guy did not have these things
Right.
that I'm looking for. When in reality, there's a much deeper issue. Now,
I think
one thing
that's
that, yeah, go ahead.
no, well, all I was going to say was I think that
Yeah.
this word narcissism gets thrown around quite a lot, right? And yes, it's true, there are narcissists out there, but it's the motivation that you'd have to look at. So for an avoidant person, like I said, they experienced a significant amount of neglect. And so it's to bring some compassion and understanding that it's not that they're deliberately being emotionally avoidant, it's just that they don't have the skills developed. And so it actually takes a secure person or, you know, an anxious person who's willing to be able to step into being more secure to help that avoidant person tap into their own emotions. It comes from a very different motivational space than someone who's a narcissist.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't for the listeners out there, I didn't mean to associate that narcissists are
Okay.
avoidance or anything. To me, it sounds very similar because the similar trait would be lack of self awareness in that regard. How you cannot get help if you don't think that you need help because you lack of self awareness.
Right.
But yeah,
Yes.
absolutely, totally different. One is all a manipulative and all of that. The other one wants connection but doesn't know how to show emotions and how to
That's
connect.
exactly right. Yeah, beautifully put. Beautifully put.
But since you mentioned about partner dependent, I was wondering how much is partner dependent when transitioning from one attachment to another, and how much has to come from within? Because my understanding is that an avoidant can make a secure person be anxious. A secure person can make an anxious person be secure. So I wonder how much is out of our control and how much can we control to some extent.
Yeah, I guess that brings up the question of how much do we actually lose ourselves in relationship, because we can become we mirror. You know, I don't know. I was dating a vegan for a while, and eventually I stopped eating meat. So because we're mirroring those kind of things, and that's exactly what you're talking to. I think that the secure can become anxious, the anxious can become avoidant, because we start to mirror the other traits in the other person. And that's because we care. It comes from a point of care. If I didn't care about this other person, then what they're doing, I'm not going to try and emulate. I'm not going to try and mirror because I don't have any necessarily respect or value that person in any way. When I care about them, then I want to, you know, it's like I like you, you like me, you are like me, I am like you. And so there's that mirroring that's happening when it's matters of the heart, it becomes more heightened. So it requires a real grounded base in yourself to become secure. Ideally, it's why it's so important for us to do the initial self-development work so that we are grounded and we can define our boundaries. We can own what is our stuff, you know, our own woundings, our own stuff that we've got to work through. um, once we're aware of those, we can articulate those and communicate those in a far more healthier way. Otherwise, I've seen cases of people that do lose themselves in that relationship because they become so wanting to help and support the other person that they lose their own identity and become mirrored in the other person's neuroses.
So it sounds like, and that a lot of it comes from within. That if we have enough self awareness, we especially if we're anxious, because if are secure, you're secure. But if we're anxious and for avoidant, it, we can sort of heal ourselves, and we can process ourselves a lot of things in the past, and sort of transition from that type of attachment style to more secure. But also at the same time, it sounds like that with the help of another person, we can become more secure without even realizing. So if we are an anxious or we are avoidant, if we are with a secure person, the secure person, because of the way that they carry themselves, the way that they treat the relationship, the way that they treat you, can make you transition and to be more secure. Sounds like.
I think it's possible. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I think it is possible, but I think it's rare. I think because these are woundings that have been happening since childhood, so we're going to repeat them. We may end up, we may be lucky enough to find a partner that's very supportive and help us, but ultimately we have to do the inner work ourselves. And I would strongly recommend any of your listeners that are on the fence about getting help to try and overcome any patterns that they're observing, to really speak to a coach, to really get the help, because we only know what we know. And whilst we're stuck in our own mindset of thinking, we need the mirror of a coach or somebody in those therapies to be able to help mirror back to us what we're exhibiting. Because I speak to so many people, and that kind of wow factor, they had no idea. Just talking with you on this call, when you're talking about needing to prove yourself to be a man, how would you know if you're going to keep on that treadmill of keep on trying to prove that I'm a masculine, until someone can mirror back to you, well, what's the end goal here? When are you going to stop? When is it going to be enough, right? And that's what I do. That's the job of the coach. And I don't think it's fair to put that on another person in a relationship with you that's romantically involved. I think it's beautiful to have that space that's supportive and nurturing as you go through that, to help you. But ultimately, the work that you do, the inner work, is your personal journey. And there's professions out there to help you do that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that statement. In fact, I think that most people lack self-awareness, have like a lack the deep self-awareness to really understand themselves, especially with all the distractions nowadays. People don't spend a lot of time within their thoughts and emotions and feelings. We try to get distracted all the time with our phones, with our laptops, anything. And having somebody that helps you navigate yourself inside your head, and helps you create or develop more self-awareness, at the end of the day, will help the person. So I completely agree with you. But one of the things fascinating about, especially nowadays, when it seems, at least in the West, um, when it comes to dating, that is a mess. Accordingly, I mean, according everyone's like, it's a mess. That the anxious people tend, or the anxious people with anxious attachment, tend to get addicted to the avoidant behavior, again, because they associate this suffering and joy with of the pull and push, the hot and cold, with passion or love. So when they meet actually a secure person, they feel that the person is boring, it's not
Yeah,
exciting, because none of those bells, are going off, right?
that's right.
Which this prevents them from exploring and giving a chance to what they could be their ideal partner. And given that fact, how can anxious people break this cycle?
Right. So again, it comes back to managing the emotion, regulating the emotions. And so it's a beautiful thing that you're bringing up, that anxious people have learned to associate that the butterflies, the kind of, um, you know, thunderbolt and lightning. I've been hit by the love lightning bolt, right? That triggering of the emotions, the escalating of the emotions, is associated with love. But that's only because they learn as a child that there was an inconsistency in their caregiving and in their caregivers. And so they would go through moments of having love and moments of being avoided, being rejected from them, but being removed from them, sorry. And so um, when the caregiver comes back, the child is really excited. Here, I'm getting love again. I'm getting love again. So they learn to associate that. So what happens in the adult world is that they end up chasing avoidant people because that's what they've learned to associate with love. When they get that thunderbolt and lightning, it's a trigger for them to say, "Ah, oh, it was love at first sight. This is it. It's got to be right." Without recognizing they're actually being triggered, and it's a big warning sign to they're just going to repeat the same pattern. The same emotional roller coaster is going to be happening. And so it's a big step for the anxious person to start regulating, and where they're feeling like it's boring, that they're not being triggered, that is actually really healthy, regulated, secure relationship. So they're not going to be going on this emotional roller coaster. And that's a learning curve. That's a learning pattern, because otherwise they're going to get stuck and stay stuck in those same push-pull dynamics in exactly the same way that the avoidant person has to step into the discomfort of owning their emotions and tapping into that in order to become more secure.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, the way that you put it that way. Because one of the reasons why I ask this question is because you see, or at least on my algorithm, both on Twitter, Instagram, I see either posts or videos of mostly women making comments or statements that they were with a guy that treated them well all the time, that it was like perfectly fine, that was giving them everything that they needed from an emotional point of view. It's not that the guy was a doormat, and he didn't have any boundaries. The guy was treating her well, and most of them, again, these videos or this post I saw was okay. It was so boring, and to me, it's like okay, then I understand where you're coming from, but then you're not seeing the real point, and that is affecting you as a person, as a female, thinking that I keep getting into a relationship with avoidance, that those relationships don't last, and I'm making those insecure people lonely and miserable as well, because they cannot find somebody that values those traits.
100%. Yeah, that's right. And so there's where it comes down to the individual. At some point, you want to get off that roller coaster ride and do something about it, or stay on that roller coaster. It's it's I talk about the heartbeats as being a currency. The only currency that we have of any value is our heartbeats. We can't change, we can't, the moments that we're spending here now, we're spending heartbeats here. I'm not going to get those heartbeats back again. So what I'm choosing to focus those heartbeats on, if I'm wanting to repeat those patterns of push pull dance in a relationship that's not going to get anywhere, that's my choice. And it's about waking up to, what are you spending your heartbeats on? Are you going to be able to regulate that in a secure, beautifully nurturing, supportive relationship that isn't going to have those massive highs and lows, but it's going to give you the support and a reassurance for an anxious person that is so important. That's exactly what they need. That's what they're really, really searching for. Or continue to stay on the roller coaster and have those massive highs and lows. So the choice is really coming down to the individual. And I say that, with women that I've been coaching that are blaming their partners, he was a narcissist, he was this, that, and the other. They're not taking any responsibility, but they're also stuck in that blaming. And a certain amount of blaming isn't it required, right? I get that there is a certain amount of blaming that can go on, but when you continue staying in that without stepping up and you know taking responsibility for your part in that relationship, then you're wasting your heartbeats. You're stuck in a victim like mentality that isn't going to serve you or anybody else. And so my wake up call for people is, what are you spending your heartbeats on? What energy are you spending your heartbeats on? Because that's your choice.
I love that framing. I absolutely love that framing, and it's true. I mean, it takes two to tango. So, and some level of accountability is necessary. And one of the reasons why I interviewed this um, um, guy, this man who has a PhD in neuroscience about narcissism, because I felt that the buzzword of 2024 was narcissism. It's like
Yeah,
everyone, if your relationship doesn't go well, the other person was a narcissist.
yeah,
Probably it wasn't, but
right,
you just like to blame the other person. So
right.
I wanted to gain a lot of clarity and give other people clarity about that. But you said about how we need to regulate ourselves, and as somebody who struggles with anxiety a lot, when our attachment system is activated, right, we can think clearly. I mean, our emotions basically hijacks us, and we tend to act erratically, and it's almost like we can think clearly. The entire emotional response basically controls our body, our decision making, our prefrontal cortex are nowhere to be found. It's almost like we cannot think clearly. And are there any techniques that we can sort of that we can apply to quote unquote turn this off? I mean, that pull ourselves out of the emotion and down regulate our nervous system to a point that we can make better decisions.
Yeah, this reminds me of Viktor Franklin. I don't. Do you know who Viktor Franklin was?
No.
He's he's a survivor of Auschwitz. So he's a
Okay.
philosopher and survivor of Auschwitz, and he's written a book, Man's Search for Meaning, I think it is. And in there, he talks about the response is the stimulus that you get. Okay, and so being able to um, not respond, which is a reaction, but to take responsibility and respond with consideration. So, thoughtfulness and being able to calm the nervous system down. And I hear what you're saying. When you're being triggered and all the emotions are heightened, it's very difficult to go calm the body. And how am I going to react to this person how am I going to respond to this person, should I say, who's shouting at me, or, in what Viktor Franklin would have been experiencing in Nazi Germany, that takes a tremendous amount of internal grounding, right? So what I suggest to people is, when the mind's going and when you're triggered, to ask yourself one very simple question: what am I telling myself that's not true? What am I telling myself in this moment that's not true? And consider the facts. Consider the things that you actually know to be true, not what you're mind reading, not what you're assuming, not the assumptions that you're making, but what are the actual facts, and respond to those facts.
Hmm. Yeah, that is what are we telling ourselves that is not true? That's we tend to jump into conclusions. We tend to assume things. We tend to draw scenarios that probably will never happen, and that's how I've been able to control my knee jerk reactions to stop myself from doing something that I might regret, from saying something that I might regret, but the emotions are still there. And and sure, I can control my reaction, but my internal state keeps being deregulated. I keep being I It's hard for me to go back to a parasympathetic, nervous system, and be more control. And that's something that, again, I don't know if I have an overstimulated amygdala. I have no idea. It's just like everything is dangerous according to my brain. But
Yes.
yeah, which is like silly, but it happens a
Well,
lot.
it's
So
there for a reason. Your amygdala is kicking in, and that being hypervigilant is stemming from that childhood wounding where you're wanting to be safe and that security that you need. So it becomes hypervigilant when you're projecting that onto somebody else and you're being triggered in that moment. This is part of a much bigger conversation. But what I take my clients through is the taking responsibility, and the difference to being responsible for or responsible to something. And it's about being able to hold your four powers of speaking, thinking, your behaviors, and see what you speak, what you say, what you do, what you think, and what you feel as your four powers. And being able to take people through a process of owning them, understanding what your boundaries are around those, and what someone else's four powers are. We all have these four powers, and owning what's mine. you can own what's yours, and being able to feel secure enough within that to define what I'm taking responsibility for and what I can let go of as somebody else's. But it is much, it's part of a much bigger conversation, and which I really work on my clients with, when we do one-to-one coaching.
I think we can go back almost to the beginning that everything is a choice. We choose to focus on the positive. We choose to focus on the negative. We choose to react in a certain way. At the end of the day, whether we are stuck, we are in a toxic relationship, we are in a job that we don't like. At the end of the day, everything comes down to our choice. And the problem is, I guess, for a lot of people, they don't want to see that, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you see it, then it's like, okay, it's up to you now. If you don't do anything, there's no one else you can blame. And that's a big threat to the ego, to the self, and puts you in a situation that you don't want to be in. So I get it.
So that comes back to the heartbeats, right? What are you choosing to spend your heartbeats on? And if you think of it as like a currency, it really helps snap you out of that. Are you in a job that you're not happy with? Are you, in a relationship that you're unhappy with? It's all very well blaming the external circumstances, but this is your life. They're your heartbeats, and you have a choice. And so be comfortable with the choices that you've made, or choose to change them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, beautifully put. Sarah, has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. We could literally go for hours to talk
No.
about this topic. It's fascinating to me, and we'll definitely going to have another one in the future. But as a closing question, what was the most valuable lesson that you have learned in the last year, and why?
Whoa. Okay. The most valuable lesson is, I think, I know we've just already talked about it, and I don't mean to be a spoiler alert on this, but I think taking ownership of my heartbeats. I spent 2 years traveling around Australia, by myself in my motorhome, and, falling into holes, having great adventures, having the most incredible experiences. But as you mentioned before, Australia has got the most lethal animals in the world, right?
Everything wants to kill you. Yes.
Everything wants to kill you. And so it was taking responsibility for my four powers, right? And deciding I can sit in my home feeling unhappy and trapped and blaming COVID or blaming my relationship, but I actually have a choice here, and I can choose to do something different. It might be hard. I'm not saying it's easy. It might be difficult, but as long as I step in that right direction and take responsibility, and being able to, we touched on it before, the resilience of being able to see the things that I've achieved, that layers on top of my confidence. It layers on top of my ability to have resilience and courage. And I choose I'm very considered about what I spend my heartbeats on. And that journey around Australia was a real blessing to help me do that. And so that's been the biggest takeaway in the last year, to really own what's mine, to not when I say not to not be bothered, to not waste my heartbeats worrying about what other people are going to think, or whether they like me or they don't like me. Not to not care, but to not be bothered by it, has been very, very freeing, because these are my heartbeats. These, my currency. That's the only thing that I can take with me to the grave, and that's an inevitability. And I don't want to waste any more time worrying about people that aren't deserving of that energy. So, yeah, that's been the biggest takeaway for me.
I love it. I love it. And having the choice and the courage to step into the unknown, the uncertain, and just doing what you're doing is just inspiring. It's like powerful, and a lot of us kind of want to do that. A lot of us have the power to do so, but we are again too too afraid to do so. But and that's why, to me, it's like the perfect answer. And I know that you'll inspire a lot of people to do the unorthodox thing, do the weird thing that everyone might judge. But at the end, if you if he speaks to you, if you follow your intuition, then everything should be fine.
Beautiful.
Sarah, it's been wonderful. But where can people find you, work with you? I know that you help a lot of people, especially that have anxious attachment, but also if any avoidant comes to you, you'll provide those tools as well.
100%. So yeah, so through my website, My Confidence Coach, so www.myconfidencecoach.com.au. You can contact me through there. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. I'm doing regular workshops within the anxious attachment space. So yeah, just jump onto my website, myconfidencecoach.com.au, and yeah, you can get in touch with me there or find out what I'm doing. And I'm also blogging on that. You can join my newsletter through that website. Like I said, I'm getting ready to do a speech tomorrow to a load of people about resilience, yeah, and being a motivational speaker. So yeah, I'd love to hear
Perfect.
from you.
Perfect. I'll add those, all of those to the video show notes and YouTube description. Once again, Sarah, it was a total pleasure having you on and such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope your listeners get something of value for this because it's a real passion of mine, and I just can't imagine not doing this. So thank you again for the time. Thank you.
100%.